So this is going to be a lesson on Geometry Chapter 1-3, or 1.3, which is about middles and midpoints. So we're going to talk about like bisectors, midpoints, and stuff of that nature. So how basically stuff gets cut in half. So first off, what is a middle in geometry? Because a middle or a midpoint has a very specific meaning in geometry. So to start off, a midpoint or a middle value is halfway between the endpoints of a segment, which means basically that implies that, if I put my pen here, that if I have the point A and I have the point B, and then point C is like somewhere up here, if that's point C, C would not be in the middle of A and B because it's not collinear. So it has to be collinear with the other two endpoints, and then it also has to be halfway between the two endpoints. So halfway meaning that this distance here, A to C, has to be equal to this distance here of C to B. So it can't be off center, it can't be out of the segment, and it has to be halfway between the ends. Sometimes you'd see it written like this. So sometimes you'll have like A, and then you have point C, and then you have point B. And instead of writing the numbers, they do this, dash, dash, which basically these dash marks mean that these two segments are equal. So single dash here, single dash there means these two segments both have a single dash, so they're of the same length. So sometimes they won't mark it down with a 3. They'll just put a dash mark here and a dash mark there, and that should imply that those two segments are equal, and thus C would be in the middle or halfway between the two. Now, how do you find where this value is at? Like if these were numbers, how would you find out what the value of C is? Well, basically what you do is you take the average of the endpoints, or in this case, because you only have two endpoints, it's basically find the median. So if you don't remember that from stats, what you do is you take the ending number plus the beginning number and divide it by 2. So end plus beginning divided by 2. Now, because it's adding, and actually, because it's adding, it actually doesn't matter the order you do it in. So if you do the x1 plus x2 divided by 2, that will still get you the same answer because it's addition. So it doesn't matter what order you do it in as long as you remember to divide it by 2 at the end. So let's take an example here. So let's look at this one down here. I'm not going to bother going over the guided one here because you can read that on your own. But down here it says the temperature of a thermometer dropped from 25 to -8. Find the midpoint. So we have -8 here. We have 25 here. And the temperature starts here. And then over time it drops all the way to here. And here is where it ends at -8. And we want to know what value was the middle point or the halfway point. Well, just like before, what we do is we take our end number, or we take this number here. It doesn't matter whether you start or end. So we take 25, one of the numbers, plus the other number, divided by 2. So end1 plus end2 divided by 2, which would be 17 over 2, which would be 8.5. So 8.5 would be our halfway value. And again, you can kind of see this here because if you check from 25 to 8.5, that is a distance of 16.5. That's 16.5 degrees between the two. And from 8.5 down to 8 is also, or -8 rather, not +8, but from 8.5 down to 8 is also 16.5. So it's halfway between the two. The distance from 8.5 to -8 is 16.5. The distance from 25 to 8.5 is 16.5. So that's one way you can check if your answer is actually the middle, is just check to make sure it's halfway between the two values. So let's just do a few examples. We don't necessarily need to go through all these here, but let's just do a few to make sure we get this idea here. So if I want to find the middle of this value here, this is 8, this is 12, so I would do 12 plus 8 divided by 2, which would be 10 divided by 2, which would be 5. So again, very, very easy or straightforward calculation. Just make sure you watch out for your negatives. So this is a -3 and a +7. So it'd be 7 plus -3 divided by 2. And when you add a negative, just like the last example, you're actually going to subtract. So it'd be 4 divided by 2, which is just 2. And then if we do this one down here, I'm going to skip this one here because it's very similar to the top one. But if we do this one down here, again, it's just decimals. So 5.6 plus -4.5 divided by 2. So this works for decimals and fractions and whole numbers. It doesn't matter what type of number you have. The process of add and then divide by 2 is going to be the same. And once again, just make sure you remember that you have a negative involved here. So it's actually more subtraction. So it'd be 1.1 divided by 2, which would actually give you 5 or 0.55. And that would be your middle value, 0.55. 0.55 if you want to be more accurate. So again, straightforward calculation when you just have two numbers, add them, divide by 2, there's your middle value, and move on. But what happens when we have two numbers, like on a coordinate plane? So if I have like this here, and this is the point 3, 5, and this is the point 7, 1, and I want to find the middle here, how do I find that? Because now I have two numbers to deal with on each point. I have a 3, 5 here and a 7, 1 here. Excuse me. Well, what we do is we basically find the middle of each one separately. So we find the middle of the x's, we find the middle of the y's, and then that's our new point. So that's why we have this little midpoint formula down here is what it's called. We take our two x's and find the middle, which is this right here, x1 plus x2 divided by 2. Take our two y's and find the middle, y1 plus y2 divided by 2, and we put them in a point. And once again, it doesn't matter whether you do x2 or x1 first because you're adding. You can do it in any order you want. So let's take an example here. So this is the point 26. This is the point 53. If I want to find the midpoint, so I want to know where is the middle point here, I find the middle of my x's. So I have a 2 for my first x, a 5 for my second x. So 2 plus 5 divided by 2, which would end up giving you 3.5. And then for y's, I have 6 and I have 3. So 6 plus 3 divided by 2, which would end up giving you 4.5. I think, let me check that here real quick. I should probably know this, but I'm afraid I'm going to get it wrong. So yeah, 4.5. I didn't want to redo the entire video just because I couldn't add. So my midpoint then is at the point 3.5, comma, 4.5. And that's that. So once again, as long as you do the midpoint formula twice, once for the x's, once for the y's, it's not that much of a different problem. You just, again, do it twice for each type of value, x's first, then y's, and then you have your point. So not too much of an offshoot there. So let's do one more with a negative just to be sure we got it. So let's just do this one right here. Again, I'm not going to necessarily do both, but we can just do one as an example. So if I want to find the midpoint of these two values, again, I'm going to target my x's first. So 5 and negative 4. So I'm going to have 5 plus negative 4 divided by 2. That's going to be my x midpoint. And then my y's. So 12 plus 8 divided by 2. That means my y point. So 5 plus negative 4, that's going to be a positive 1. Divided by 2 is going to be 0.5. 12 plus 8 is 20. Divided by 2 is going to give me 10. I think we did that one earlier too. Hopefully I did it right. But this would be your new midpoint, 0.5, comma 10. That's your midpoint. Again, same thing as before, just twice. Once with the x's, once with the y's, and then you're done. Now, we're going to get to something called bisectors here, which is the more geometric way of cutting something in half or so. So a bisector is a segment, this is what it's called, a segment bisector, is a segment, a line, or a plane that cuts another segment in half. So this is how you would properly say in geometric speak, is a segment bisector is any segment, line, or plane that intersects a segment at its midpoint, which basically means that if something is a bisector, let's say DE bisects AB. So DE is a segment bisector. Why? Well, because AB is a segment and DE cuts it in half. So this right here is congruent to this right here. This distance A to C is equal to this distance C to B. So because DE cuts it in half, we say that DE is a bisector of the segment, or that it's a segment bisector. Now, if it is a segment bisector, that means the point of intersection, namely this point C right here, that is the midpoint, or MP. That is the midpoint of this segment right here, because that's the point where it's the halfway mark, is where it's cut, or was where it gets cut in half. So segment bisectors, by definition, always intersect the other segment at its midpoint, which means that, again, the first half of the distance is equal to the second half of the distance. AC is equal to CB. Now, we can use this aspect to help us kind of reverse engineer a problem. So it says here, find the coordinates of J if K is at negative 1, 2, and the midpoint of JL, and L has the coordinates of 3, negative 5. So lots of words there. What's the main thing you want to do in geometry when you have this type of situation is draw a picture. So find the coordinates of J if K, which is at negative 1, 2. So let's draw a point here, K. K, and we'll call it negative 1, 2. It's the midpoint of JL. So K is the midpoint of JL. So that means that K is in the middle of JL. So I'm going to draw it in the middle. I'm going to put a J over here and an L over there. And it says L has the coordinates of 3, -5. So I'm going to put a little mark here that says L has the coordinates of 3, -5. And I want to know what are the coordinates of J. So I want to know this is what, comma, what. So I'm looking to basically fill in the spots for J here. I know that K is in the middle at -1, 2. I know that JL is over here at 3, -5. I want to know what does this have to be so I get the right middle. What you do is you basically set up your midpoint formula in reverse. So if I want to solve this for my midpoint formula says x1 plus x2 over 2. That gets my x coordinate. That is equal to the x coordinate in my middle. We'll say xm, sort of x coordinate of the midpoint. Well, if I put some values in here, x1, well, let's call this x1 and y1, just for sake of argument. Again, it doesn't matter whether we call these 1 or 2. So I'm just going to call them 1 just because we know them. Now, k is in the middle. So this would be my xm and my ym, because this is the midpoint. So these actually are the m's here, not the 1s or the 2s. So when I go to set this up, I'd say, okay, x1, which is 3, plus x2, which I don't know. That's actually over here for j. So this is going to be my x2 and my y2 over here, over 2, is equal to my middle x, which is -1. So what this is, again, is basically saying here is if I take my end x and add it to my jx and then divide it by 2, I should get my middle x. So this is basically what we've been doing just backwards, because we're starting with the answer, -1, and we want to know what number do we have to put in here to get that answer of -1. And then once we get this set up, it's just back to algebra. So you're going to go ahead and solve this equation for x. So you would multiply by 2 on this side, multiply by 2 on this side. This cancels out. We get 3 plus x second is equal to, that'd be -2. Subtract 3, subtract 3. We get x is equal to -5. So j over here is starting at -5 comma something. And then to get the y's, we do the same thing. So remember, for the y coordinate, it's y1 plus y2 over 2 is equal to the y middle, or ym. So we plug in what we know for L. We know that L's number is -5, plus we don't know what J's number is, so we just call that y2, over 2 is equal to the middle y, which we know is 2. So once again, we times by 2 to start solving this equation here. So this crosses out. We get -5 plus y2 is equal to 4. Then we add 5, and we get y is equal to 9. So my endpoint then would be -5, comma, 9. And that is not my endpoint, but my middle. I shouldn't say, sorry, my mic cut out there. I shouldn't say endpoint, I should say midpoint, not end. Oh wait, no, sorry, it is the endpoint. What am I talking about? So we have the midpoint, k is my midpoint, but the endpoint j here, this endpoint here, is -5, comma, 9. Almost second guessed myself there. So this is the coordinates of the point j. This is where the point j here is sitting. So if we have this point for j and this point for L, then k, -1, comma, 2, would be our midpoint. So let's try to go over one more of those just to, again, get it ironed out here, because it is kind of a weird problem at first, but it's not too difficult once you get to know it. So find the coordinates of G if P is the midpoint of EG, and then E is at this point and P is at that point. So once again, let's draw out a picture here. We have the segment EG, so EG, and it says P is the midpoint. So P is somewhere in the middle. We know that E is at -8, comma, 6, and P is at -5, comma, 10. And we want to know what point is G at? Question mark, question mark. Well, what we do is the same thing as before. We find our x first, then our y. So for our x, we know that it's x1 plus x2 over 2 is equal to middle x. So our x1 is simply the x that we have. Now, again, you can leave it as x1 and put in -8 for x2, or you can say put in -8 for x1 and leave the x2 as your blank one. Again, it doesn't matter which x you plug it in for, just pick one. So I'm going to call this x1. So I'm going to say -8 plus x2 over 2 is equal to my middle x, which is -5. Again, your xm is whatever x is in the middle of the 2 points. So we're going to multiply by 2 on both sides. To cancel this out, we get -8 plus x2 is equal to -10. And then we add 8, and we get x2 is equal to -2. So that's my point over here, -2. And then for the y's, again, same deal. y1 plus y2 over 2 is equal to ym. So, again, plug in 6 for y. So 6 plus y2 over 2 is equal to my middle y, which is 10. So we times 2, we get 6 plus y2 is equal to 20. Minus 6, we get y2 is equal to 14. So that then is my answer. So it'd be -2, comma, 14. And that would be my endpoint of G. So again, a little bit tricky. It's just working backwards from the problems we did before. But overall, again, it's a very similar process each time. So lastly, we have the algebraic portions, which is basically if you have a segment, how do you find out how long the original segment is given the two half segments? So it says here, find the measure of RV if S is the midpoint. Well, if S is the midpoint, that means that this segment here has to be equal in length to this segment here. And it says that this segment RS is 3x plus 9 units long, and this segment SV is 5x minus 7 units long. So what that means is that the first segment, 3x plus 9, has to be equal to the second segment, 5x minus 7. Why? Well, because again, RS has to be equal to SV. Whoops, SV. Because again, that's what the definition of a midpoint is. It cuts the segment in half. So the first half has to be equal to the second half. So once again, you use your algebra to solve this. So get your x's to the same side. Get 9 equals 2x minus 7. And then we add 7 to both sides to get the x by itself. And we get 16 equals 2x. And then we divide 2, and we get 8 is equal to x. Now here's the problem. People stop here. You can't stop there because the question wasn't to find x. The question was to find the measure of RV. How long is RV? I know that x is 8. So what I have to do is plug this back in. So I'm going to plug it back into both of these here, just first off to check my work and to make sure that, again, I'm not making a mistake here. So I'm going to plug both those into the 3x plus 9 and the 5x minus 7 bit. So 3x plus 9, 5x plus 7. I'm going to plug 8 into both of these. So 3 times 8 plus 9, 5 times 8 plus 7. And if I'm right, then both of these should come out to be the same number. So 3 times 8, let's see here, that'd be 24, right? And then 24 plus 9 would end up giving you 33. Whoops, 33. And then 5 times 8 is 40, and 40 plus 7 is 47. Now, obviously something's wrong here because these two numbers are not the same. And so what you would go here and check and look is see that, okay, something's not right here. So let me go back and make sure I did everything correctly. And then you would notice that, hey, this is a minus 7, not a plus 7. So what you would do is you go back, and again, this is totally intentional and not a mistake that I made by accident here. We can just go with that answer, right? So this would actually be a minus, not a plus. And then it would make sense because 5 times 8 is 40, and then 40 minus 7 would also give you 33. So again, if your answer is correct, then both of these numbers should come out to be the same value. If they don't, check your check first, and then check your work to make sure you didn't make a silly mistake like I intentionally did, right? So we know that both of these come out to be 33. So 33 here and 33 here. So again, the second mistake people make is saying that, okay, my answer is 33. Well, it's not. because I asked you to find the measure of RV, not RS or SV. So I want the measure of the entire distance. I want this entire length here. So if this piece is 33 and this piece is 33, that means together they're going to be 66 units long. So always make sure you read the question, figure out, did I find what the question was asking? Sometimes it might ask you just to find x. Sometimes it might ask you to find one of the smaller segments. Sometimes, like this one, it might ask you to find the entire length. So make sure that you have the actual answer that you need. If it asks you to find a length or a measure of something, then usually you're going to have to take your x number and plug it back into something, like I did here. So be on the lookout for that keyword. If it says find the length or the measure, you're going to have to most likely plug your x back into something in order to get that to work. Let's do one more of these here. Again, this one doesn't have a picture with it. So it says find the value of x. So again, this one's asking just for the value of x. So we don't need to plug anything back in here usually. If C is in the middle of A and B, so let's draw that real quick. C is the midpoint of A, B. So I have A, I have B, and it says C is in the middle. It says AC is 4x plus 5. So A to C is 4x plus 5. And it says AB is 78. So A, all the way to B, is 78. And I want to know what the value of x is. So I want to know what the heck is x worth here. Well, this becomes a little bit of an issue because I don't have anything over here. Or do I? Because remember, if C is in the midpoint, if C is the middle, that means that this segment has to be equal to this segment. So if this segment is 4x plus 5, that means this one also is 4x plus 5. And now I have an equation that I can set up. Because since I know that this is the midpoint, I know that the small segment 4x plus 5, AC, plus the other small segment 4x plus 5, which is CB, is equal to the entire length, which is 78, or AB. So this piece right here, 4x plus 5, plus this 4x plus 5, is going to be equal to the entire length of 78. So always look to figure out what equation you can make from the geometric picture. And again, the midpoint, if C is the midpoint, that means you know that this half has to be equal to that half. So in the previous example, they were two separate values, 3x plus 9 and 5x minus 7. But I still set them equal to each other. In this case, I could have set it as 4x plus 5 equals 4x plus 5. But if I did that, 4x plus 5 equals 4x plus 5, and I try to solve this, all I end up with is 0 equals 0, and that doesn't help me out. So this setup, while accurate, is not going to give you, it's not going to lead you to a correct answer. Whereas this setup as small piece plus small piece equals large piece, that's also a way you can set this up, and it will give you a more correct answer that you're looking for, which is the value of x. So sometimes you might have to set them equal to each other. Sometimes you might have to set them added equal to a bigger value, which in this case, again, is the entire length of 78. Let's go ahead and see if we can't solve this out here. So we get, that'd be 8x, 4x plus 4x is 8x, and then 5 plus 5 is 10, equals 78. Subtract 10, we get 8x is equal to 68. And then we divide by 8, and we get x is equal to, let's see, 68 divided by 8. That would end up with 8.5. 8.5. And that would be our answer. So, once again, it's a fairly straightforward problem, except that in this case we had to set up a little bit differently than the last one, and mainly because if I set it up like this, another way I know that this is not the correct way of doing it is because I'm not using the 78 at all. They really wouldn't give me the 78 unless I was supposed to use it in some way. So that would clue me in that, okay, I have three values here, 4x plus 5, 4x plus 5, and 78. I need to figure out some way to get them all to work in an equation. Well, one way would be to, as I just did, take small segment plus small segment equals big segment, and use that as your equation basis. Unlike in this case, they only gave me these two. They didn't give me a value for RV. So I couldn't set this up like I did the other one because I'd be like 3x plus 9 plus 5x minus 7 is equal to what? I don't have a value to put here. So instead of setting it up this way, I went to set them equal to each other instead because that's the only information I have to go off of. So again, look at the information you have and decide which route is better. This route where you set them equal to each other, or this route where you have a number that you can add them together to get. In this case, 78 would be that number. So that's it for this video here. Just want to make sure I didn't have another slide I was forgetting there. If you have any questions, again, please let me know. Otherwise, hope this helped you out. Have a good day.